Are politicians trying to take your guns, or do they just want common sense gun laws? Is the AR-15 a bullet hose intended to spray hundreds of rounds per minute, or is it nothing more than a varmint hunting rifle? And was the AR-15 originally designed for the military or for civilian sporting use? Welcome to the Defenders and Disciples community. In this video, I'll be answering these questions and many more as I address 6 more lies about the AR-15. If you haven't already, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button down below. And if you've already subscribed, click that bell to be notified of our future videos. As always, nothing I say is a call to violence or an attempt to incite violence, nor should it be taken as legal advice. And just like our last video, I'm going to start off with 3 lies from the anti-gun community and then follow up with 3 lies from the pro-gun community. And if this or my other video offend you because you think I'm giving the other side too much ammunition in the debate over gun rights, no pun intended, then you might value your agenda more than truth. Anti-gun lie number 1. Nobody is trying to take your AR-15. This lie and many like it are often said with phrases like, all we need is common sense gun control, despite the fact that these phrases and many like them are rarely if ever defined. I believe that these lies are also intended to comfort the less informed gun owner by making proposed gun control seem less draconian and not as infringing as it actually is. People who dishonestly claim that no one is coming for your AR-15 or any other gun for that matter can typically be broken up into 2 groups. The first being those who want full-blown gun confiscation but would never admit to it because of the public optics, except when they say the quiet part out loud.
Hell yes, we're gonna take your AR-15.
Consider this by Josh Sugarman, who was the former communications director for the National Coalition to Ban Handguns. Although handguns claim more than 20,000 lives a year, the issue of handgun restrictions consistently remains a non-issue. Assault weapons are a new topic. The weapon's menacing looks, coupled with the public's confusion, can only increase the chance of public support for restrictions on these weapons. The motivation to ban so-called military-style assault weapons has always had very little to do with public safety and everything to do with public optics. And then the second group are those who claim to only want to ban the future sale and transfer of these weapons. I would argue that this strategy to grandfather in guns that are currently owned but ban future sale and transfer is the more insidious of the 2 strategies. First, because it capitalizes on complacency and people's resistance to defend the rights of others. This makes me think of the Martin Niemöller poem, First They Came For, except an adaptation of his poem towards gun control would be, first they banned the bump stocks, and I did not resist because I did not own a bump stock. Then they banned AR pistols, but I did not resist because I did not own an AR pistol. Then they banned the sale of new ARs, but I did not resist because my AR was grandfathered in. Then they came for my gun, and there was no one left to resist. And the second reason this strategy of gun control with the grandfather in clause is so insidious is because while yes, it does allow for people who have current ownership to keep their guns, it bans the future sale and transfer of those guns. So it's essentially a complete ban for future generations. Make no mistake, many lawmakers do not trust you with private gun ownership. And this ideology is not constrained to one side of the political spectrum. Consider this, for example. Richard Nixon wanted a federal ban on all handguns. Ronald Reagan passed the Mulford Act in 1967, which prohibited the public carry of firearms. And though he didn't renew it, George Bush flip-flopped on his support for the 1994 assault weapons ban.
My view is clear. I did think we ought to extend the assault weapons ban.
And then this one might hit hard for some of you.
You have to look at the age of 21 for certain types of weapons. I mean, some people aren't going to like that, but you're going to have to look at that very seriously. Don't worry about bump stock. We're getting rid of it where it'll be out. I mean, you don't have to complicate the bill by adding another 2 paragraphs. I'll do that myself.
Now, in all fairness, many of these Republicans have been much more supportive of gun rights than their opposition. But it's important to understand that gun control rhetoric does not rest on one side of the political aisle. But politics aside, rather than give up our rights, what we should be doing is pressuring our lawmakers to prosecute violent crimes so that we don't have phrases like career criminal in our national vocabulary. Next, let's address some misconceptions and exaggerations about the AR-15. Anti-gun lie number 2. The AR-15 was designed to spray and pray from the hip and can fire anywhere from 300 to 500 rounds per minute. Some argue that the features of the AR-15 enable it to fire a large volume of bullets over a broad killing zone without having to aim at each individual target. I believe this lie is rooted in Hollywood depictions of machine gun fire,
Say hello to my little friend!
in addition to the improper use of the M16 during the Vietnam War.
Everybody knows you never go full.
Automatic fire was an abuse of the M16's capability and led to diminished accuracy as well as ammunition waste. Regardless, the modern civilian AR-15 cannot fire in burst or fully automatic mode, and even a skilled shooter could not reach the firing rates of fully automatic. Though despite this, like I said in my last video, the M16 and the M4 and M4A1 are all used primarily in semi-automatic in the military. And semi-automatic is one shot per trigger pull, which is how most handguns work and many rifles work. Semi-automatic technology is not a new technology, and it's been around for decades. As to the similar features that the AR-15 shares with like the M16 and M4, these features still do not encourage spray and pray firing from the hip. Removable magazines are not a new technology, and many handguns, rifles, and even some shotguns use them. Pistol grips are also not intended to encourage firing from the hip. In fact, if you consider the ergonomics of the pistol grip, it actually makes it less comfortable to fire from the hip due to the increased strain placed on the wrist. As to the handguards, or sometimes referred to as barrel shrouds, these really serve a very similar purpose to the wooden grips you would see on a hunting rifle or a hunting shotgun. They help to protect the barrel from damage as well as ballistic interference, and they help to protect your hand from when the barrel gets heated. Depending on the caliber as well as the barrel thickness, you only have to fire a handful of rounds before you can notice a significant change in barrel temperature. Let's next address the second part of this lie, which is that the AR-15 is designed to fire 300 to 500 rounds per minute.
I'm a lead farmer, mother.
Now keep in mind, even if these numbers were true, which they're not, they're still well below the cyclic firing rate for the M16, which is anywhere from 700 to 900 rounds per minute. There are three variables that dictate the firing rate in semi-automatic: the skill of the shooter, the ammunition constraints, and then the realistic limitations of the weapon. Let's address the skill part first. A 2007 study on police attacker shootings from the Force Science Research Center revealed that most inexperienced handgun shooters could fire 2 rounds per second, with a few being able to fire 3 rounds in 1 second. In Rampage Nation, Securing America from Mass Shootings, firearms experts were consulted and set the average shooter's rate of fire for semi-automatic handguns and semi-automatic rifles at an identical 2 rounds per second for average shooters, and then 3 rounds per second for experienced shooters. Now, depending on skill and ability, there are some shooters that will be able to exceed that. But generally speaking, just a few rounds per second is what's reasonable for most people. These exaggerated rates of fire are especially unrealistic when displayed in rounds per minute. And with the exception of the horrific Vegas shooting where the shooter took advantage of what's called plunging fire and machine gun tactics, the use of high rates of sustained fire are almost never used in mass shootings. This brings me to the limitations on the AR platform. Just know that the M16, M4, and pretty much any other machine gun in the military is not designed to fire at a cyclic rate for long periods. But where do these lies originate that the AR-15 can fire anywhere from 300 to 500 rounds per minute? It possibly originated from a Heller vs. DC testimony by Brian J. Siebel, where he claimed that a 30-round Uzi magazine could be emptied in 5 seconds in semi-automatic mode compared with 2 seconds in fully automatic. And though Siebel's testimony was unsupported, it remained a part of the majority's testimony that M16 rifles and the like may be banned because they are dangerous and unusual. Keep in mind that even in the Army's manual rifle marksmanship, it states that the max effective rate of fire for the M16 or M4 platforms is about 45 rounds per minute. Now, there are absolutely instances where increased rates of fire would enable the shooter to kill or injure large numbers in a crowd, though these instances are extremely rare, with the Vegas incident being among the rarest. So no, the AR-15 is not designed to spray and pray fire from the hip. It's also not designed to fire 300 to 500 rounds per minute. It's designed to fire with the stock in your shoulder and in a semi-automatic mode, just like its cousins, the M16 and the M4. That is semi-automatic fire. 1 shot per trigger pull, no more and no less. But what about those supposed big scary bullets that the AR-15 fires? Anti-gun lie number 3, the .223 caliber or 5.56 millimeter are both high-powered rounds that will decapitate or rip off limbs. Now, for the rest of this video, I'm just gonna refer to it as the 5.56. So when you hear me say 5.56, just think 5.56 millimeter or .223 caliber. And yes, many AR-15s are chambered for 5.56 millimeters. But no, the 5.56 is typically not known for removing limbs unless you get shot in a small appendage. For those of you who don't already know, take a moment and pause the video and ask yourself, which one of these cartridges do you think the AR-15 fires? Okay, you think you got it? I would imagine that if you don't know anything about the AR-15, you probably picked something in this range, just based on maybe what you've been told or what you have heard in the media. But actually, this one right here is what the AR-15 fires. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that, oh, look at this small little round, it's not that dangerous, it's basically a 22. I talked about that in my last video, how I hate when people say that. So let's get back to the main topic. As to the devastating effects of the 5.56, there are many variables at play to determine what happens when a 5.56 strikes soft tissue or bone matter. But once again, these rounds are generally not known to decapitate or remove limbs. Just know that a direct hit to the brain, central nervous system, or any other organ responsible for blood pressure is probably going to be fatal regardless of what caliber. Unlike pepper spray, tasers, beanbag rounds, and other less lethal munitions, bullets are lethal weapons designed to cause death or serious bodily injury if they strike an animal or a human. If you are using a gun to defend yourself or defend life, you should not be shooting to intimidate or to injure.
If you want to protect yourself, get a double-barrel shotgun. If there's ever a problem, fire 2 blasts outside the house.
Please, no! No! No!
You should be shooting to stop the threat, or you shouldn't be shooting. We need to dispense with this ill-informed narrative that there are gentler versions of deadly force.
So instead of anybody coming at you and the first thing you do is shoot to kill, you shoot them in the leg.
So no, the 5.56 is not a high-powered or fully powered cartridge, but it wouldn't matter if it was. All right, now that we've addressed those 3 lies from the anti-gun community, let's go ahead and pick on the pro-gun community. Pro-gun lie number 1. The AR-15 was originally designed to be a civilian sporting rifle. Now, as with most pro-gun lies, I think that they are generally in response to an anti-gun lie. And this one, I believe, was in response to the gun grabber's assertion that the AR-15 is a weapon that only belongs on the battlefield. Many people, when arguing this, also reference early advertisements for the AR-15 like this one, though they ignore other advertisements like this one. But eventually, I was made aware of a 1988 interview with Eugene Stoner, who designed both the AR-15 as well as the AR-10. In the interview, he indicates clearly that he was designing the AR-15 and its predecessor for military applications.
Take my word for it. Let's take a look at the tape.
The Army was thrashing around trying to come up with a 7-pound full automatic NATO caliber weapon. With the AR-10 design, we did come up with a 7-pound weapon.
And though the AR-10 met the Army's criteria for their lightweight rifle program, they still wanted a rifle that fired a smaller caliber, but it could still penetrate an enemy combatant's helmet at 500 yards. And this segues us into our next pro-gun lie, which is pro-gun lie number 2, that the 5.56 was originally designed to wound enemy combatants rather than kill them. As Eugene looked for the closest caliber that met the Army's criteria, he initially landed on the .222, which is a Remington sporting round. Eugene said that the .222 seemed like an obvious choice, but that it needed a military bullet, so he contacted the Sierra Cartridge Company to make the .223. This .223 Remington later became the 5.56mm NATO, which had slightly higher chamber pressures as well as a heavier bullet. And this myth that the military had a criteria to wound the enemy is just not true. Remember that part about helmet penetration? If a bullet penetrates an enemy's helmet, it's going to do a bit more than wound them. Also, I can't think of a reason why you would need a sporting cartridge or a varmint round that would have the ability to penetrate a helmet at 500 yards. And before the keyboard commandos jump to the comment section because they're completely misunderstanding what I'm saying, understand this: the fact that the 5.56 was originally designed for the military means that it has more protections under the Second Amendment, especially when you consider the Miller versus DC case. And finally, I want to address one of the most widespread lies about the AR-15 within the gun community. And that is pro-gun lie number 3, that the AR platform is unreliable. The irony with this lie is that I've actually probably heard it said more times than I've experienced malfunctions with an AR. In all seriousness, I think this is partially due to people building an AR improperly or using poorly spec'd parts. Or when people set up unrealistic tests in an effort to make a point about the AR's reliability, though these tests rarely, if ever, represent real-world operating conditions. The only exception to this with regards to reliability could be the earlier versions of the AR platform. From what I understand, these earlier versions' feed ramps contributed to reliability issues, and then they later came out with the M4 feed ramps. Now, I'm not an armorer, so I could be wrong, but in my experience, modern ARs built by reputable manufacturers with properly spec'd parts are extremely reliable. If you've enjoyed the video, then please like and comment below. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, train to a higher standard.